Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of Star Wars Ahsoka. It was episode 5. It was called Shadow Warrior. And as it begins, we see that Hera has landed on Satos at the site where Ahsoka went over the cliff, but can't seem to find her friends. Until she does find Huyang holding Sabine's helmet at the cliff edge, lamenting the fact that Sabine and Ahsoka didn't stay together as he had advised them to do. Meanwhile, back in the world between worlds where we left Ahsoka at the end of episode 4, she's talking with Anakin, who tells her that he's there to finish her training, which she says it's a little bit too late for. To which he replies by saying that it's never too late to learn, before igniting his lightsaber and engaging her in a lightsaber fight. Back in the real world, Huyang examines the map orb and determines that it's beyond repair. And Captain Teva tells Hera that Senator Organa will only be able to make excuses for their squadron being absent for so long. And it seemed as though he was referencing Leia because he says she. So I'm guessing at some point she served in the Senate. Did we know that before? Unless there's another female Senator Organa. Anyway, somehow, likely due to the fact that he's Kanan's son, Jason can hear the lightsabers clashing in the world between worlds over the crashing waves in the real world as he stands at the edge of the cliff with Hera. Back in the world between worlds, Ahsoka catches Anakin off guard for a moment, but then he smashes the walkway beneath her with his lightsaber as if it were glass, sending her plummeting, and when she lands, she's her younger self under fire in a world between world recreation of her first mission with a younger Anakin during the Clone Wars, which he says is her training. During a break in the fighting, they have a conversation about how leading troops in battle is not what she signed up for when she wanted to be a Jedi, but Anakin explains to her that he has to teach her how to be a soldier now that war has come, despite the Jedi's best efforts to keep the peace. And as he's walking ahead of her towards the enemy with his blue lightsaber ignited into the fog, she sees a vision of him for a moment as Darth Vader carrying a red lightsaber. Meanwhile, Hera and her squadron continue looking for Ahsoka and Sabine. But back in the recreated past, Ahsoka takes out a few separatist enemies during the siege of Mandalore, but then stops just to look around as the battle rages. So we've gone from her first mission with Anakin to the siege of Mandalore, which took place after she had separated from him. Soon Anakin approaches and they talk about how she's inherited knowledge from him, the way he inherited knowledge from Obi-Wan and the way Obi-Wan inherited knowledge from his master, and that she is part of a legacy in that way. At which point that she sort of echoes in the next thing that she says to him, something that Baylan said to her about how her legacy is one of death. And she responds to Anakin saying that she's everything he was by saying that if she's everything he was, then that's not a good thing because what he is dangerous and more powerful than anyone ever realized. So they were talking about the Vader elephant in the room without mentioning it specifically, which I thought was interesting. Anakin then gets frustrated with her, saying that she's learned nothing and that they need to go back to the beginning, at which point he ignites a red lightsaber and seems to have Vader's yellowish eyes as he attacks her and force kicks her younger self away. And we next see her as her present-day self back on one of those transparent bridges in the world between worlds, as Anakin approaches her, changing back and forth between himself and Vader in the full armor. When he reaches her, he's his Anakin self, but with the yellow eyes and the red blade, and he says she lacks conviction. And they continue fighting, he with a red saber and she with her white ones. He knocks one of hers out of her hand and says that it's time for her to die, after which she gets him at blade point with his own saber, but instead of killing him, she says she chooses to live in response to a choice he gave her earlier when he said that she needed to decide whether to live or die, the latter of which she would do if she stopped fighting. His eyes go back to blue, and he tells her there's hope for her yet before disappearing. And then it seems to start snowing in the world between worlds as the bridge disappears and water rises where Ahsoka is standing until it rises over her head. After which she finds herself floating in the waters beneath the cliff as the ghost approaches, and an X-Wing pilot dives in and rescues her as she mutters Anakin's name. After some time, when Ahsoka is back on her feet, Jason tells her that he heard her fighting with her lightsaber and asks who she was fighting, but she doesn't answer. Ahsoka then holds a piece of the broken orb and uses the Force to listen to echoes of the past, and she figures out what happened to Sabine. Captain Teva tells Hera that the New Republic fleet is arriving, but that it's probably not a good thing. And as Ahsoka stands in the circle, contemplatively holding the broken orb piece, one of the space whales shows up. Meanwhile, Hera takes a holographic call from Mon Mothma and is told that because she doesn't have any evidence of the stuff that she was talking about before she left, Thrawn coming back, etc., she needs to return immediately with Ahsoka so that Ahsoka's testimony can help Hera from losing her command. But when Ahsoka boards Hera's ship, she tells her that she knows how to find Sabine. This, of course, will involve approaching the space whales, called the Purgle, to get their help in following where Sabine went. After Ahsoka communicates with the biggest one in the pod, it gives her permission to fly her ship inside of it. She then tells Huyang, however, that she doesn't know if the whale knows where Sabine is, but she's okay with going with it wherever it goes. Just before the episode ends, over comms, Ahsoka promises Hera that she will find Ezra and Sabine. That's where the episode ended. So this episode was fan-flipping-tastic. Better than last week, which at that point was the best episode so far. This episode was that good and then some. I just thought it was incredible. Visually, this show is just jaw-dropping. It's stunning. The part where Jason can hear the lightsabers over the sound of the waves crashing and how the sounds are so similar, but you can still hear the lightsabers distinctly as, the waves are crashing, and it's almost the same, but not. It just was very chilling, I thought. And, just the idea that he can hear it through the Force is crazy. The lightsaber fighting was fantastic. I thought it was excellent. Choreography was just amazing to me. I thought Hayden Christensen was excellent. He was better in this than at any other time he's performed as Anakin or Vader. I just didn't understand why at some points it seemed like it was actually him on screen, and then at other times CGI, when it didn't seem like there was much age difference between the different versions they were showing in different time periods. So I know why they went with CGI, but like, why did they then use the actual him? I don't know. Maybe the CGI was just that good in the moments where I thought it was him, because there were moments where I realized it was CGI, which is unfortunate, but I don't know. It's just weird. But anyway, he was great. And, I didn't like him in the prequel films. So for me, that's saying a lot. I did come to like the character of Anakin during the Clone Wars animated show, but of course that wasn't Hayden Christensen. But anyway, he did a great job, and it was just unbelievable to me how good he was and how the relationship between he and Ahsoka felt like they hadn't missed a day from the Clone Wars. It was just excellent. The young lady that played the younger Ahsoka was very good. It was just hitting all of my Clone Wars feels buttons. It was just incredible. I did think some of the dialogue was a little bit, I don't want to say trite, more platitudinous, I guess, where they were saying things without really saying anything. It was kind of like phrases that didn't really say anything. But that might just be me, and maybe if I watch it again, I'll get a different feeling. But there wasn't much of it. And I thought there was some value to, the parts of it that dealt with how there is a lot of Anakin in Ahsoka because she was his Padawan and he was her master and he trained her and she served under him and was close to him, in her formative years, and how she is today part Anakin, who she knows became Vader. And so seeing her sort of give voice to that uneasy or fearful feeling that she has about all of that. Not so much that she'll turn to the dark side or whatever, but that everything she does is unavoidably tinged with that which is also Vader. And she has to deal with it. And she has to keep fighting because otherwise she'll die, whether that's literally or figuratively. And so she can't let that or anything else keep her from continuing the fight, which I think is what he was trying to tell her. And she comes to realize that by the end of her time with him. And I just thought that that was fantastic. And I don't think we're done with the two of them necessarily. I think he might show up later. I hope he does. I hope they get to continue the conversation. Because the last thing he says to her is, "There's hope for you yet." But is he going to get to see, you know, how she moves forward now? And is he going to talk to her about it? I would like to see that. So I hope that happens. The sequences with the whales, Virgil, were interesting, but I have to say, I never really thought too much of the whales in Rebels. I wasn't really digging it. So I'm not really digging them here, but I accept that it's a plot device. And so I'm cool with it. And I do have to say that the depiction of them in live action, especially this week, as opposed to the last time we saw them on this show, was really cool. It just, visually, it was great. And the music they used was great. And how they had Ahsoka like go on the outside of the ship and like talk to the really big one through the force. It was really beautifully done. And so just from sort of artistic point of view, just for the artisticness of it, I liked it, even though I don't really like the Purgil as a thing. But yeah, I thought this episode was fantastic. It's the best episode so far, much better than last week, which at that point was the best episode so far. So I just couldn't be happier with this show. And I really hope some of the naysayers, and there have been several, so I'm not singling anyone out. There have been several naysayers whose videos I've seen and whose comments I've seen on Facebook about how this show isn't that good. And I really hope that this episode won them over, because if not, I don't know. I think that says something about them more than it says about the show. I just don't see how you couldn't have loved this episode if you're a fan of Rebels and a fan of the Clone Wars. It was just amazing, amazing Star Wars. And as I said earlier, visually, it was just stunning. So not just the Purgil sequence, but everything. It was gorgeous. David Tennant continues to knock it out of the park. Rosario Dawson is excellent. It's really, really good. I'm really enjoying this series. And I'm so glad that this episode was actually an hour. Unlike the other episodes that have definitely been too short, and I cannot wait for next week's episode. For now, I'm going to get out of here until I return. May the force be with you.